Sam's got us here to talk about what's going on in Massachusetts, as it appears as though more safety procedures are coming into play with some of these sports books, limiting the amount of wagers, limiting the amount of winning, which of course limits the amount of losing as well. But Sam, not everybody on board with this, and kind of funny and kind of sad to a degree. The sports books are just kind of like stepping to the side saying, we're not going to limit anybody from winning, losing, and you know why, I think.
Yeah, it's a really actually interesting angle, in my opinion, to a topic we've talked about on this show lately, which is, setting limits for players, mainly from the perspective of problem gambling, making sure that people aren't betting more than they can lose. Certainly, you've seen a lot of effort from DraftKings, FanDuel, and the rest of the gang to promote responsible gaming. And, with all this messaging out, you want the game is more fun when it's for fun. You want to be betting for fun, not necessarily trying to get rich or anything like that. But what we've seen kind of take place over the past few years in the industry is some people, a very small community, slowly banging the drum of limiting the other way. When you're winning too much at a sports book, if you're a really sharp bettor, a lot of sports books, what they'll do is say, actually, we don't want to take all that money. We're going to limit you down to maybe, in some cases, even 5 cents for a bet. So if you're someone they know has a history of winning, obviously these are big data companies, they can do that. And that's been the prerogative for the last couple of years. The reason we haven't really heard about it much is because most people, frankly, don't win. That's why these companies make money. That's why they exist. But one instance here, Massachusetts is now sort of looking at this topic for the first time. They had a roundtable yesterday talking about, basically learning why sports books get limited, things like that. And none of the sports books showed up, like you mentioned. So that was really interesting. Some of the commissioners said they were frustrated and angered with kind of that response of them declining to show up. Frankly, from the sports betting company standpoint, it kind of seems like, they're sort of, I wouldn't say bluffing, but saying this isn't a huge issue for us. We don't see it as an issue, and didn't want to kind of validate that by, physically being there. Essentially, the commissioners are kind of just exploring the matter, but it is the first state really to take a look at this issue. There would probably have to be sort of a law change to get anything written where sports books can't limit different players. And it's a practice that's been going on for a long time in this industry. Often you'll see on Twitter people saying, oh my God, I can't believe that I can only bet 5 cents at this sports book or that sports book.
Right.
So it's something that you're aware of if you're in the community, but for most people, it's not really an issue. Obviously, sports books want to take the majority of their bets from people who don't bet as much. It's sort of the casual players, although, VIPs and big fish are very important to them. It's the ones who are really sharp and really good at it that they don't want kind of on their platform. So nothing's going to happen overnight with this, but it is really interesting to see a state kind of starting to look at it, and maybe the sports books pissing them off a little bit. We've seen Massachusetts obviously be pretty aggressive compared to most of the other states in this department. Maybe a year from now, we're talking about a real sort of change in this way. Maybe it would lead to sports books leaving the state if they had to, set limits or post limits or not be able to limit people. But for now, it's kind of getting the ball rolling on a really interesting topic that doesn't get much attention. So it'll be interesting to see, kind of where this goes from here.
Yeah, you had me, Sam, until you said potentially leaving the state. I assure you, none of the sports betting operators are going to leave the state, even if they have their bets limited. By the way, commonplace practice in the past in the unspoken offshore world where bets were limited, simply put, somebody's winning, limit them as far as what they can do. This is not unusual as to this story. It's just unusual to sort of hear this now. All right, let's move on. Let's get to Rush Street, their CEO, with a very important discussion this past week on the future of what Bet Rivers holds. They've had this very, I would say, positive niche in some markets, Sam, and they haven't really expanded beyond that. So what'd you take from this conversation?
Yeah, pretty interesting comments from a company that's sort of been fourth or fifth in total market share since U.S. legalization started. They, haven't been too competitive compared to FanDuel and DraftKings, but they're there, and their online casino product is pretty prominent in a bunch of states. They actually just took over in Delaware for 888 as kind of, the only operator there. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do in that market. But the CEO coming out this week and essentially saying, while all these sports books are zigging, we're going to zag parlays and sort of squeezing more money out of people has not really been their focus. What they've been talking about is doing something you've seen other companies like BetMGM and Caesars do. I wouldn't say completely abandon or give up on the sports betting race, but kind of refocus it and reframe it within their larger thinking and look to iGaming. The CEO, Richard Shorts, talked to investors this week about the importance of leveraging third-party affiliates to promote casino games and sort of use that to get to customers as opposed to the mass advertising that a lot of the companies, frankly, no one's been able to compete with, have done. And people have been kind of spending money, or sportsbooks rather, have been spending money to keep up with that. He's talking about sort of a different avenue to reach people. Mainly, I think iGaming you're going to see propped up a lot more when you talk about the investment side of companies and the future there. Even though it doesn't seem like many states are going to legalize it anytime soon, it seems like now is kind of the lull period where you're going to have these smaller companies like BetRivers, Rush Street Interactive, the parent company, even, legacy casino companies like Caesars really focus in on getting the product right to ultimately prep for when that expansion happens to kind of be the first mover or really successful in that space. So interesting to hear him kind of talk about, we're not trying to do parlays. We're not trying to push people towards this where we get a higher hold percentage in sports betting. It's more about the big picture business, iGaming as it relates to sports betting, and then everything that could come from there. They've got a lot of bingo games, different sorts of ways of trying to cater to customers outside of kind of their traditional sports betting, to kind of get them away from some of the disadvantages they have compared to a Flutter, FanDuel, DraftKings, which sort of have unlimited pockets when it comes to advertising, especially as it comes to sports betting as well. So it'll be interesting to see how they do in Delaware going forward as kind of the main company there, really the only one offering any product. And we'll see how investors react to kind of that as an example. They don't really have any more states on the horizon. So when there's less competition, is that going to be good for BetRivers? Are they actually going to be able to capitalize on this? You think on paper they would, but we'll have to see going forward kind of how everything shakes out, especially when you have those other companies at the top and the newcomers like Fanatics, ESPN Bet, and obviously you have BetMGM and Caesars all in there. It's sort of like, who's kind of the next domino to fall out of there? Some people have speculated BetRivers, but it seems like they have a plan to kind of, keep themselves afloat and stay competitive going forward.
Yeah, and it would be interesting if Delaware ever opened the door up for more operators outside of BetRivers, how that would change considering how successful they have been there. All right, finally, Sam, let's cap it off here. Illinois talking about this whole Dave & Buster's betting stuff. For people who are not familiar, there's a chance in the future, and even now, soon, you'll be able to go bet on your favorite Pop-A-Shot players at Dave & Buster's. What's going on here? What's the latest in Illinois?
Yeah, when Dave & Buster's announced that they were partnering with a company to offer, betting on their games, whether it's Whack-A-Mole, Pop-A-Shot, at their facility, it caught a lot of pushback from regulators and the public in general. Sort of, how is that going to work? How are we going to regulate this? So in Illinois, the fight is still going strong, even though tomorrow's the last day to pass any laws. One lawmaker is pushing a bill that would ban entertainment companies like Dave & Buster's from offering this sort of product or this sort of mechanism. So he's really optimistic it gets done. It just got added to a new racing bill. There's a chance it happens and Dave & Buster's is barred there. We'll see if other states then copy it and, take that as kind of the prerogative there. So an interesting, weird story as always in this world.
It is. What's next? Betting on, racing of animals, not named horses. Who knows what's next? All right. Great to see you, Sam. Thanks. Have a happy Memorial Day to you.
Thanks, Greg. You too.